So what's up?
Okay, so I have lots of questions for you today. I
Okay.
guess first off, I am recording now.
Yep.
So if you would please introduce yourself, tell
Yep.
us a little bit about yourself and what your connection is to the cattle industry, please.
Travis Maddock. So law rancher and I guess small business owner. We own a retail store up here as well. In north central North Dakota, in the town of Maddock, Benson County. Cow calf operation. We run some stockers, do some value added type of things too. Currently, I'm serve as the vice chair of the Federation of State Beef Councils. I've been on the North Dakota Beef Commission for about 10 years and now serving at some, I guess, national level leadership positions. So, yeah, a little bit on who I am.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, would you describe for us what it looks like serving in your position on the Federation? I guess what kind of brought on this interview was the revelation that there was a project sponsor paid for by the Beef Checkoff that educated kids on the cow's ruminant stomach. And then it went on to talk about the release of methane from cows.
Sure.
And ask those students to produce a recommendation. I assume was just artificial, but their sort of recommendation to a rancher on how he could manage his cattle to produce less methane. Yeah. So that's kind of the impetus of this interview, but we'll be going into some other things too. But I guess if you want to describe what it looks like for you sitting in that seat and hearing AR ideas and how those are approved.
Yeah, so just briefly, the process it's pretty grassroots. I know a lot of folks don't really know how the process works, so I'm going to describe it. I'll be as brief as I can. Contractors have to be approved by USDA. Then they submit authorization requests. We call them ARs. That's a government term, I guess. To the Cattlemen's Beef Board. There's been 6 committees. They've done some restructuring because of some of the budget categories. We'll have 5 committees moving forward. Those committees have roughly about 40 to 50 producers on them that score the ARs, listen to the contractors, and then provide recommendations to the operating committee. So those things move up to the operating committee. There's about 20 of us that sit on the operating committee. There are 20 of us that sit on the operating committee. 10 come from the Cattlemen's Beef Board, 10 come from the Federation of State Beef Councils. The ARs are heard. We meet annually and go through the ARs, and then we debate the ARs. Of course, we have a budget based on what the collections are for the checkoff, and then we have to try to fit the ARs and the contractors into that budget. So that's a little bit of the process. All producers, once again, completely producer driven. The contractors are all nonprofits, which is why you see foundations and federations and things like that oftentimes. The contractor has time to present their AR. We go through a fairly rigorous review of the ARs. Starts at the committee level, leading up to the operating committee meetings, which occur in September. The contractors then have another chance to take the committee comments. They have a chance to adjust their AR, to take those comments and do something with them if they choose to. If they choose not to, that's fine too. And then we meet virtually with the contractors again. The operating committee does prior to the operating committee meeting, and they talk through their projects with us and present us their projects. And so once we get into the operating committee meeting itself, then the contractors once again present, talk about the changes. We try to use the best information we possibly can with regards to past performance of the projects, what their goals and objectives are. Can they proof concept? Is this a project that's worth funding? But then at the end of the day, it's really about trying to determine return on investment, right? You look at a project, you look at an AR, and inside all the ARs are called tactics. And the tactics can have several different projects, or the ARs can have several different tactics attached to them. and you try to look at those tactics and say, hey, is this worthy funding, and will it create demand for beef? And so you go through the process, and over a couple of pretty heavy, long days, the operating committee looks at these projects and then says, you know what, this is worth funding. Let's look at the budget then and see at what level can we fund it. So that's the process that we go through, and of course Farm Bureau goes through that very same process.
Okay. So several questions there. First off, I guess maybe we should back up. Would you briefly describe what it means serving on the Federation? What exactly is the Federation of State Beef Councils?
Yeah.
And then the Cattlemen's Beef Board. And as you said, I know there's 10 members of the Federation, and there's 10 members of the Cattlemen's Beef Board that get together on this operating committee. So it describe to me what the Federation is, how you got to this seat, and then we'll.
Right. Cattlemen's Beef Board is the overseeing body of the Beef Checkoff. And that's made up of roughly 100. It moves up and down a little bit depending on how many cattle and how much beef we bring into the country. But let's say it's around 100 producers, and there's, I think, 6 or 7 importers on there now because of the amount of beef that gets the trimmings and stuff that comes into the country. Appointed by the Secretary of the USDA, the Ag Sec, and each state's represented based on the number of beef cattle, basically. Right. Federation of State Beef Councils is different. So Federation of State Beef Councils was formed out of the remnants of the old Livestock and Meat Board. The Livestock and Meat Board, prior to the merger which happened in the mid-90s, the Livestock and Meat Board was working with all these independent beef commissions and beef councils out there to try to bring some dollars together to promote beef. It was one of their tenets. As things were kind of winding down and the National Checkoff was winding up in the mid-90s, there was a merger between the National Cattlemen's Association and the Livestock and Meat Board. Livestock and Meat Board became the Federation of State Beef Councils. Didn't change all that much, just kind of formalized it a little bit more. And so the Federation of State Beef Councils, I believe there's 41 state beef councils which participate in the Federation. Aggregates state checkoff dollars now, not dollars from the federal side, but state checkoff dollars. So it's a voluntary thing. The state beef councils choose to participate. They don't have to, and there's some states that don't. There's some states that do not participate, but most do, and most of the big cattle states do. So especially the Midwest, from Texas up to North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois. I mean, the bigger cattle states, they all participate at a fairly high level. And what the goal of the Federation is, there's a couple of things, but the big one is to say, hey, a state like North Dakota, we got 1 million beef cattle, or if you count cows and calves, it's 1.5 million, a little bit more. But we've got a low population. So let's take some of these checkoff dollars and let's aggregate them with South Dakota, which is in the same boat. They've got a lot of cattle and a small population, and let's get those dollars together into a large pot where they can do more good. So we can buy national advertising, or we can do digital marketing at a larger scale in San Francisco or Los Angeles or Seattle or New York, as opposed to having the North Dakota Beef Commission try to carry that out at a very small scale. So it aggregates that together. The other thing that the Federation does is it provides state services. So a lot of the websites you see for the promotional stuff that the state beef councils, the state beef commissions that they have, a lot of that is supported by the state services arm of the Federation of State Beef Councils. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the Federation then is housed inside of NCBA, but it has, its sole purpose is to promote beef and promote demand for beef.
Right. But to clarify, like when you talked about the Federation, the money that the Federation has to spend comes from the state beef councils. The Federation does, though, have a say in voting on these ARs, which they are funded by that for the first half of the checkoff dollar, not the state's half of the dollar.
Right, the states have. So the Federation sits on the operating committee. Those dollars all come out of the 50 cents that flows through the CBB though. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, very good. All right. So hopefully that was clear as mud for everyone. I know it's a lot.
You know, I've been doing this a long time, Carrie, and it's complicated. The way this is set up, the system that we're handed when we get on to a checkoff board is complicated. The way that it's all put together, it's a little complicated, and it takes a little bit of understanding to kind of figure out how it all works.
It is. It's very confusing. Yeah. Okay. So then we'll go back to the you all approving the ARs, and then the way I understand it, once the operating committee approves the ARs, then they go on to the full CBB for approval.
Yes, that's right. So the executive committee of the CBB has to approve the budget. So the operating committee approves the budget for the contractors. That goes to the executive committee of the Cattlemen's Beef Board. They have to approve it as well. And yes, then the CBB approves it, and then we move on. So,
okay.
Yeah. So several steps there to get that budget approved.
Okay. So do you, as members of the operating committee, do you follow up ever on these ARs to see if they
Absolutely.
they said they would, if you feel like they complied with the active kind of thing?
That's a normal part of the process. So the committees come together twice a year. The larger committees, they come together here. They'll come together here in February in a month or so at Cattle Convention. The committees will convene, and the contractors will come in front of those committees, and they will give updates to the committees about here's where we're at, here's what we've accomplished, here's what we think's gone right, and here's some of our challenges. We do ask the contractors to do that. So you do get an update in real time. And then we do have updates constantly coming, contractors constantly working with CBB to keep them updated on what's going on. And that information is available to anybody for the most part, but certainly available to the committee members. So they know what's going on, and they do stay abreast of how the projects are moving.
Okay. So, and again, with this particular project that had some people concerned, and just sort of for our listeners, when they listen to this, again, there was a project that was supported that Farm Bureau helped implement, the way I understand, or the Farm Bureau Federation proposed the AR and was approved for funding for it. And the one piece of the project, again, had these students making recommendations on how a rancher or cattle owner could reduce the methane emissions from their cattle. Has that been reviewed yet? Is that something you'll be reviewing, or have you all reviewed that so far, the results of that, and are you comfortable with that project?
You know, the Farm Bureau Federation has been a contractor to the checkoff for well over a decade, and they've been doing yeoman's work on creating awareness of agriculture, particularly the beef industry, in large school districts all over the nation. They're in over 100 school districts in big cities. They reach out to well over 1 million students on an annual basis, providing curriculum to students that otherwise wouldn't get beef-based curriculum. Now, the study, or I'm losing my word here.
Project.
The project thing. Well, the project, but also the lesson that you're talking about doesn't state anything that's not factual, and I'll stand by that. You know, we know that cattle produce methane, and we know that methane is classified as a greenhouse gas. But that's about as far as I'm willing to talk about. I don't have a lot of the specifics on it. Yeah, we stand behind the project. Of course we do. You have that project. It's a large project that provides tremendous value to introducing to kids that have never seen a cow, they'll never see a pig, but they get to through these lessons. And so it's a good project. It's a project that we debate heavily all the time, because it is one that we know needs to be funded, and we have to find dollars for it, because it does provide tremendous value. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Have you ever, as a member of the operating committee, have you ever voted against a project or an AR that was ultimately approved?
That's interesting. So once again, as a process point, it takes 14 yes votes out of 20 to approve funding for an AR. So it's not a majority. So you can't just have 10 plus 1. It takes 14. It takes a super majority to pass. I am confident, yes, that I have voted against funding ARs that have ultimately been funded. Yeah, I've done that. Sure.
Do you remember what they were, or?
Off the top of my head, no. And here's the deal, though, and we have to preface this a little bit because we can get into the weeds pretty quickly. Sure, I voted against projects funded at levels that I thought were too much. But then when we got to a level that made sense, then I probably voted to fund that project. So if you were to say, somebody were to move to fund a certain AR at, say, $1 million, and I would have thought, no, I'm not comfortable with that because I don't want to take money out of, say, Beef It's What's for Dinner, which is a highly successful project or program. I'm more comfortable at a lower level. I would have voted against that and then most likely voted for it. Now, keep in mind, though, at the end of the day, you have to vote for the entire budget, right? So at the end of the day, I voted for this funding during I think I've been on the operating committee for 4 years. This will be my 5th year. If I get not elected again, I guess. It'll be going into my 5th year. I've always voted for the final budget. I've never voted against the final budget. Once we've parsed through and made all the sausage, so to speak, and got everything mixed in and found levels that everybody got comfortable with, I've always voted to approve the final budget. Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, so switching gears just a little bit, maybe the Beef Act, the way I understand it, prohibits any policy development or lobbying being funded by the Beef Checkoff.
So just to clarify, I just want to make sure that we clarify this. What it actually says is that checkoff dollars cannot be used to influence policy. That's what it says. You can't spend checkoff dollars to influence policy.
Yep. Okay. And
but I want to preface that real quickly, though. That doesn't mean that information that the checkoff comes up with, let's say scientific research that the checkoff is funded, that then policy organizations can't use that data then to go ahead and use that to influence policy. And an example of that is the dietary guidelines that just came out. Big win for the beef industry. Tremendously important. And that doesn't happen without all the science that the checkoff's funded over the past 25 years about the nutritional value of beef, about how fats don't cause cancer, don't cause diabetes, all those good things that we know to be true that we had to get good scientific data on. So I just want to make sure that we're not parsing too much there. The dollars themselves, the checkoff dollars, can't be spent to influence policy, but that data sure can. And we're really working in our favor here this week. So.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. All right. So, looking at the beef industry long range plan, that is a Beef Checkoff product.
It is not. It is in part a Beef Checkoff product. It encompasses the entire industry. So the long range plan is not funded by the checkoff, but it is a tool that we use in the checkoff to look at. So the long range plan is a big group of producers come together and they say, hey, what's going on in our industry? What do we want to see, or what do we see the next 5 years looking like? And they convene every 5 years. So a long range plan is not a checkoff document.
Okay.
Yep.
It's linked to on the checkoff website.
Because we do look at the long range plan. We look at certain components inside of that long range plan to help us put together, I guess, to kind of, help us make decisions. Like when you have that long range plan, it is a document that we do look at, that we do rely on to say, hey, where should our dollars go to best fit? But not every component of the long range plan has checkoff implications. Just certain components of it help us kind of guide the checkoff process to say, hey, here's what we think the long range plan, here's where we think we need to go. Are there things we can do within the checkoff, legally, I guess, to follow the rules, which is, once again, we can't influence the policy side, that we can use that as a guideline. So that's what we're doing with the long range plan and the checkoff.
So who creates long range plan then?
long range plan is created by a big group of producers. I think there's about 20 folks on the committee. It's driven by NCBA. That's for sure. It is an invitation, and you've got a wide group. There are folks on there that have checkoff experience. There's folks on there that have policy experience. There's feeders. There's cow-calf producers. It's a wide representation of the industry that sit down and go through this process to develop this, this guidebook, so that it provides guidance to both sides of the aisle, so to speak, both the checkoff and the policy side, as to, hey, where should we be going over the next several years.
So are there representatives of the CBB or the Federation on the long range plan? Like,
there certainly are members of both that would be on there, but they're not there. They're not there representing CBB. They're not there. They're active producers in leadership in the beef industry.
Okay. So how is it decided that the checkoff or the CBB would utilize that? Who decides that?
Well, that's an interesting question that I don't really have the answer to. It's been something since my time on the checkoff. The long range plan has always been a document that we've looked at, particularly as I've been in leadership at the national level. It's been a document that we've always kind of used to say, hey, how do these decisions, so say an AR, how does that affect the long range plan? It's something the contractors use as well. They can look at that long range plan and say, hey, here's the roadmap moving forward. So can we look at what ARs might best fit to satisfy the goals of the industry? So,
okay. So has anyone, to your knowledge, ever discussed the concept or the idea that there's some in the industry that obviously were not involved in creating that and may or may not believe that is the best path forward for the industry?
That's always going to be the case, Carrie. One of the great things about the beef industry is we're so diverse, and you and I, obviously, we diverge in our opinions on a number of things, but we can sit here and have a great conversation about it. And that's what this industry should be about. Of course, you're going to have some folks that aren't going to like what you're going to see. You got a lot of folks that call me names on social media because I'm involved with the checkoff. That's just life.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing about this process, though, and I can't stress this enough, it is very open. There's no back rooms. There's nobody smoking a cigar in the back room, twirling their mustache, trying to plot against their neighbor. This is all, anybody can be involved with this. You just got to get involved. And so I agree. When that long range plan comes out, are there going to be people in the industry that are going to say, well, I don't like that? Of course there are. There's going to be people that are going to say, hey, and there's going to be others that say, I really like that component of this part of the long range plan, but I don't like that component of the long range plan. But that's why you have 20 some people sitting in a room debating it. You have great debate, you go back and forth, and then you choose a path. And that's how that long range plan is formed, to the best of my knowledge. Now, I've never been on that committee.
Right.
And that is my understanding of how the LRP process works. So.
Okay. All right. So I guess getting more specifically into that then, like there's obviously the first item on the long range plan deals with policy. And I just took a few notes here. I think it says that part of the strategy is to educate policymakers, build alliances, promote pro-growth legislation. So again, how does this align with the checkoff's inability to influence policy?
Well, so the checkoff wouldn't. I don't know that the checkoff would look at those bullet points that you just read to me and say that they wouldn't use those. That wouldn't be something that that you would look at. I mean, are there ancillary things? Once again, you could look at that and say, okay, are there things the checkoff can do, say, to conduct a research project or do some some producer outreach that could help drive that? Maybe, but once again, you got to stay within the constraints of what the checkoff can and can't do. Mm-hmm. So, I doubt that, not every single point on that LRP is going to be something that the checkoff contractors or the checkoff committees will be able to use. It's not intended to be like that. It's not a checkoff document. So.
Right.
It's an industry document.
To on the Checkoff website.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's, as far, I mean, I haven't seen where the Checkoff has shown support for any other beef industry or cattle industry strategies. So that seems to be what's leading I'm assuming from what you're telling me, is leading a lot of the strategies of the Beef Checkoff.
I don't know that it's leading the strategies, but once again, it's a sounding board, right? It's something you can bounce off of and say, hey, how do the decisions we're making, how do they fit into what the future might look like in the industry? So
okay,
that's the document that we tend to rely on, that we use. Yes.
Okay, but again, we don't really know why. That might be just a.
Once again, that's a lot that happened. That somehow way before I became active. That's the document that we've always used.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll shift gears a little bit again to a policy issue, and that's been obviously discussed a lot among everyone in the industry. What are your thoughts on consumer perception of U.S. beef? Do you believe the consumer is interested in buying U.S. beef?
I got to be careful here because I'm talking to you as a representative of the Checkoff, and I can't get into MCool. I don't want to get into MCool. I'll be done with some of my leadership stuff in a year, and we can revisit this once because I don't want to overstep my bounds, and I certainly don't want to say something that I shouldn't at this point. I'm still representing the North Dakota Beef Commission and the Federation. So, but consumer perceptions of beef overall, we have the highest demand we've ever had for beef. Let's start there. Over 40 years, in the past 40 years, since the beginning of the Checkoff, demand for beef is at its highest level. The willingness of consumers to pay for beef at these price points is unbelievable. And it doesn't show any signs of really slowing down. You thought once price kind of got to this point that you'd start seeing consumers look otherwise. It's a heck of a testament to this industry and to all the producers out there and all the folks that are producing this incredibly high quality beef that a consumer walks into a grocery store and they stop at the red meat portion of the sales cooler, right? And because then that's always the first one when you go by the deli, and there's always red meat right there because they're trying to get you to look at that. And then just a few feet down the road here, we've got pork and we've got chicken at a third of the price or a fourth of the price, and they're still stopping and picking up that chuck roast at $7.99 or $8.99 a pound because they understand the value proposition. So consumers love beef. Now, your question specific to do consumers like branded programs? Yes, they do. So they like having comfort in a brand. Now, whether U.S. labeled beef would become a brand or not, that's certainly up to anybody who wants to do that. I can put product of the USA on my beef anytime I want. I just have to have a process verification program. I can put raised and harvested and slaughtered in Benson County, North Dakota, as long as I can prove that. Anybody can do that. Now, I'm not going to get into is there value in differentiating the imported trim products, because I just think that I probably got to stay away from that while I'm representing the Checkoff. So.
Okay. So like I've heard a lot of people comment, and there's been a lot of stuff on social media. I'm not sure if you've commented on it or not, but to the point that the consumer is more concerned about price. The consumer is a price shopper. They don't want U.S. beef.
So if we want to talk about consumers a little bit, that's fine. And yes, overall, you look at population statistics and you look at 350 million people in the United States. Generally speaking, demand for beef is or not demand, but consumers shop based on price, and we all do. That's why when I get to Bismarck, I stop at Costco. Right or wrong, I stop at Costco because I can buy at volume and at price. So most consumers are more concerned about price than they are concerned about brand name, or they are concerned about origin or anything like that. They certainly are, and that's absolutely true. Now, That doesn't mean that there isn't value in brands. Of course, there's values in brands. We all drive a Ford or a Chevy. We all like John Deere or Case IH. We all have our preferences. Not everybody, but a lot of people do, right? Brand awareness is important. But beef is a commodity in general. And what we've done a really good job with the Checkoff is we've created the brand of beef. Beef itself is a brand. Beef, it's what's for dinner, is a valuable brand. Certified Angus beef is a valuable brand. And so you have the ability to brand these commodity products in a way that triggers the consumer's buying preference and encourages them to pick up that product even at the higher prices when compared to other proteins. So there is some brand out there, but at the end of the day, consumers do shop price and the value proposition. And the great thing about it is the value proposition of the beef products we have on the shelf right now is incredibly high. So,
okay. So I guess a few different questions related to that. One would be in talking about the success of the Beef Checkoff and demand being at an all-time high. Just, how does that fit with the fact that in the 80s, the consumer was eating over 70 pounds of beef per person, and now in 2022 down to 59 pounds with the Checkoff obviously being implemented that entire time. I guess how do we? And half of U.S. producers going out of business in that time, and 70% of independent feeders going out of business in that time. I guess do you still feel like the Checkoff has been successful, or is there something else that could have been done?
So there's a lot of questions there. So let's start with the first one. The difference between beef consumption and beef demand. Beef consumption is a function of supply, right? Beef consumption is disappearance of beef. So if we produce X number of pounds in this country, when we have X number of consumers, then that is beef consumption. And that's how per capita beef consumption is calculated, right? It demand plays into that, of course, because you still have to have consumers willing to buy. Demand is the willingness of consumers to purchase at price. It's a volume at price that they're willing to consume. So beef demand is incredibly high. Nobody's going to argue that we don't have fewer producers. Nobody's going to argue that we don't have fewer feeders, that we don't have fewer cow-calf producers. But I can tell you for a fact, living up here in north central North Dakota, that the fact that we have less cows in Benson County now than we did 40 years ago has nothing to do with the Beef Checkoff or even the economics of beef, and it has a lot more to do with the fact that it's a lot more attractive to rip all this ground up and put corn and soybeans in. And that's a fact. It just is. Most of the farmers around here, guys my age, and I'm in my early 50s, they've gotten out of the cattle business, not because the cattle weren't making money or it was unprofitable. They did it because it's easier to raise corn and soybeans and deal with crop insurance and not have to feed cows all winter long. That is a big part of it. Plus, tremendous drought, a lot of stress in the beef industry. I get it's easy to look around to try to find a reason why we've had so much attrition in this industry, and it is something that we have to look at. We have to figure out how do we encourage more young people to consider being in the beef industry. But consolidation is present in every single industry. And the small guys, they get squeezed out, unfortunately, unless they're willing to innovate, unless they really, it's really tough to be in the beef business. It is. It's a tough business to stay in. And so there's some ways to do it. But yeah, I think I hate the fact that some folks want to point out and say, well, the Checkoff's a failure because we have lost a lot of beef producers. The Checkoff's been incredibly successful. We've got almost no E. coli in our beef anymore. Thank you for the Checkoff. Demand is at all-time high. Thank you to the Checkoff. A lot of it comes from the Checkoff. To attack the Checkoff as a failure, you aren't really looking at it very hard. Yeah, is it perfect? Of course not. But it's the only way we have as producers to speak directly to consumers and to have a voice in how our product is marketed and have a voice in how we produce products. And so the Checkoff has a lot of value in my mind.
Mm-hmm. So I guess going back a little bit to the US beef question, I want to ask you, I believe you've been pretty involved in international promotion of beef also, and the Checkoff promotes US beef in other countries. Can you explain to me why the Checkoff promotes US beef in other countries? And are you interested in using Checkoff dollars to promote US beef in the US, which has never been done that I
yes, good question. So of course I'm interested in promoting US beef in other countries. What we want to do is we want to take market share away from Australian beef and Brazilian beef in places like South Korea and Japan and Taiwan and China, if we can ever get that market reopened. We're trying to take that away because then that lets more dollars flow back to US beef producers. Would I be interested in having Checkoff dollars promote US beef and US beef only in the US? No. Now, I wish there was some function in here that would allow us to do a little differentiation. I'm not going to lie. This over past 10, 12 years, I've struggled with this a little bit. But at the end of the day, we have to promote all beef consumption in the US. And those that think that we can close our borders to imported beef, I'm going to do what I said I wasn't going to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this works. We can't do it. We would be devaluing the carcass. We have to bring in some cheap trimmings. That's just it. Either that or we got to close McDonald's and Wendy's. Okay, and that would reduce overall consumption because you have a lot of folks that's the only beef they can afford is ground beef through hamburgers and fast food restaurants, and we wouldn't be able to supply all of that. We would run out of cows, or we would have to start grinding chucks and rounds, which have more value in the export market or more value in food service and in HRM. Okay, so it's a balancing act that we have in this country to try to make use of the whole carcass and find the most value in that carcass. And if some of that has to go to export, and if some of that has to go in other places, and in order to keep this incredibly hamburger-driven beef consumption thing going, we have to bring in trimmings from Australia, New Zealand, or Brazil, then I'm okay with that. I really am. That being said, back to your original question, would it be nice to have some mechanisms inside the Checkoff? But we don't. I didn't write the law. You didn't write the law. I wasn't old enough to vote for it. My dad did vote for it back in the day. But that's the law we have. And so we're doing the best we can with the Checkoff to create demand. And once again, we're doing a pretty good job. Demand is incredibly high.
So what's the part of the law that allows US beef to be promoted internationally and not domestically?
That's a good question that I don't have in front of me. There is somewhere in there is a stipulation that you cannot differentiate the beef here. So you know what, Carrie, you stumped me. I'll give you that one. I'm not sure what the law says, but I do know that because everything runs, the Checkoff is audited from top to bottom 10 times by USDA, that because we can do it, it must be legally sound. So,
have you ever been told that you can't promote US beef in the US or advertise it?
I don't know that I've ever been told that directly. That's another good question. But it's a generally accepted premise that beef is beef and shall be promoted as such. So
that just seems completely contradictory to me.
I'm sure it does. Yeah. And once again, you and I aren't going to agree on everything. So.
Right. But I'm just saying, I mean, I feel like someone needs to produce that evidence that it's allowable under the act in order to promote US beef in Japan, but not in the United States.
Sure.
And actually, Greg Haynes and Wayne Watkinson both told me, and I published it in a story, that the Beef Checkoff can promote US beef in the US.
Oh, well, and once again, that's certainly something we should have more debate about that. But this is once again how we've been doing it, and so yeah, let's have that conversation.
Yeah. So, and I guess that kind of leads to one of my last questions for you, which is on like compliance audits. Mm-hmm. I know there's some auditing done of the books. What auditing is done to ensure that the all of the ARs are compliant with USDA regulations? Do you know if
So,
being done?
so all the dollars are audited, like some of them 3 or 4 times. So keep in mind that all contractors work on a cost recovery basis, right? So Meat Export Federation has to spend the dollars before they can apply to get reimbursed for those dollars. So Meat Export Federation gets, let's say, $8 million to promote beef, since we've been talking about promoting US beef outside of the country. They have to spend those dollars, and then they have to do an internal audit of those dollars to ensure that those dollars were spent appropriately. And then they submit that back to the CBB. The CBB goes through it, and they do their own internal audit of that refunding request. That gets sent to USDA. USDA then takes a look at it, ensures that it's all right before going back to the CBB and saying, all right, you can now cut USMEF a check for those reimbursable expenses. Same thing happens at NCBA, same thing happens at Farm Bureau, same thing happens at USCA. Everybody has to have these audited. Everything has to be audited very strictly.
And so who confirms that it is in line with like USDA rules for checkoff?
Right. So,
auditor, or is that a attorney general type of an auditor?
No, I think it's the Office of Inspector General, but I'm going to say that and then I'm going to be wrong. So just preface that, people are listening. I believe that's who oversees the audits at USDA. We do internal, so I'll just give you NCBA. We do internal audits at NCBA, make sure the firewall is there, and then we pay Grant Thornton to come in every year, and they do a hard target audit to make sure that we've done our job the best we can at NCBA to keep the federation and the policy separate. And they provide a report. We just met a month or so ago with them. They provide a report, make sure that we don't have any money jumping back and forth, that all the dollars were spent, that we did our job auditing our own internal books appropriately before we send requests up to CBB for reimbursements. Yeah, okay. Everything's very strictly audited. The Beef Commission, North Dakota Beef Commission, is audited by the state on an annual basis. And then we have USDA, we have to submit to their bookkeeping as well. The checkoff is probably, those dollars are the most audited dollars that you could probably find, to be honest with you. So it's very strict. Yeah.
All right. So, okay, couple, hopefully getting toward the end here.
Yeah, you put me through the ringer. Holy crow. I thought we were just going to chat.
Right. Okay. You kind of brought up again, you serving for NCBA. So again, you're sitting on the Federation of State Beef Councils, which is a division of NCBA. Yeah. Do you feel like there's a conflict of interest for a division of NCBA to be approving authorization requests that ultimately pay NCBA millions of dollars to carry out these projects? Is that
no?
Their conflict of interest there?
No, because I'm just a producer. I don't work for NCBA. I'm not on NCBA's payroll. I don't get paid to do any of this. We're all volunteers. It's, once again, it's the system that's been signed off on 30 years ago, and it's what we have. Every one of us goes into these meetings fully aware of what our responsibilities are. Why does NCBA get most of the money? Because they have a whole apparatus put together. The whole point of NCBA is to create demand for beef and beef products. A lot of people think it's a policy organization. It's actually a beef promotion organization that has a policy arm in DC. There's 70 people sitting in Denver right now working for you and me to create demand for beef and beef products. Those people conduct research, they put on promotion, they do the beef with what's for dinner. They're working in all over the US to reach consumers, to convince them to eat beef. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest part of NCBA. The NCBA promotion division is bigger than the policy division. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I mean, if you were to walk through the offices at NCBA in Denver right now, almost everybody there is working towards creating in some program to create demand for beef and beef products. And so that's why they're the biggest contractor, because they built the apparatus to use these checkoff dollars to do what we asked the checkoff to do, which is create demand. And the proof's in the pudding. I mean, look at where we're at. Look at what we've accomplished. 30 years ago, consumers had about a 50% approval rating on beef. Now it's near 80. They had about a 50 to 60% positive perception of beef. Now it's near 80. The word is out. People are finding out. We're through the looking glass on all the junk that was out there about fat and, once again, cancer and diabetes and all this stuff. We've done a great job reaching out to consumers and creating a place where beef is center of the plate, and folks are like, yeah, we know it's expensive, but the value proposition, it's nutritious, it tastes great, we love it, we're going to buy it. And that's what the checkoff, not completely, but the checkoffs had a lot to do with that. So I'm pretty proud of the work we've been able to do.
Right. So the consumer can be influenced.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, it can be educated. Influence, the truth goes a long ways, Carrie. And by setting straight a lot of the misinformation that came out of the Ansel Keys stuff back when you and I were just kids about, yeah, you can eat a bowl of cereal and it's fortified with all your vitamins and minerals and it's the best thing for you and it's whole grain and all this. I think we've tipped that over. We've inverted that pyramid. Wasn't that fun to see? We've inverted the pyramid now, and we're starting to understand that whole foods and meat and red meat and saturated fats are good for you. And in fact, they're essential. They're essential. So we've done a good job of getting that story out.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, and I guess along with that, with the potential to influence and teach the consumer, there could be, to me, it might kind of negate this argument that, well, the consumer doesn't care about U.S. beef. Maybe they just need to be informed. And we have a lot of dollars available at our fingertips.
Yeah, we could still use a lot more dollars though to keep doing the good work that we've been doing in this industry. So
yeah, it's
always a challenge. I mean, when the checkoff started all those years ago, a Super Bowl ad 30 seconds cost $1 million. Now it costs $15 million or something stupid like that.
Right.
The ability to promote. I hear all the time, how come I don't see ads for Beef with What's for Dinner anymore? Well, because you already eat beef. And great thing about all this digital marketing, you understand this way better than I ever would. But you can go specifically into households on Hulu and YouTube TV and big population centers and send them commercials that I'll never see on my Hulu here in Maddock, North Dakota. So. It has to be a lot more targeted, but once again, proud of the work that our teams are doing, and they're doing a great job keeping beef in front of people. So, and once again, proof's in the pudding. Look at what we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years with regards to demand and price. And even the government's come around. Like I said, they inverted the pyramid, so I'm pretty pumped about that.
That is great. That's been wonderful news to see. Yeah. Okay, so. Would you have any interest in talking a little bit about the lawsuit in North Dakota over the North Dakota Beef Commission?
I would not, and because it's open litigation, we've as a group we've decided that we are not going to talk to media about it until we get some resolution. So I wondered if you wouldn't ask. I'm going to decline just because it's still everything's still pending, and we're going to let the attorneys do the talking. So.
Yeah. Okay. That was what I expected, but
yeah. I'd get a pretty nasty phone call from Nicole if I went down that road. So we'll stay here. Oh, you had to try. You had to ask. So yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, yeah. I think that covers all the questions I had for you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the checkoff. I'll just sign off by saying, is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But nothing is. And I look at the broad strokes of what we've accomplished over the past 20 years, and I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty excited about what the future holds for the beef industry. Do we need more producers? Yeah. Do I wish I could convince my neighbor kid to buy some beef cows? Well, price is a little good right now. He's thinking about it, right? And I hope that my son has an opportunity. He's 15 years old now. To become part of the ranching operation. I really do. Yesterday I was out there with my dad and my 2 brothers and my nephew, and we were PGing cows, and the sun was shining and it was nice, and it was just the best day. We were all sick. We all felt like crap, but we were all just being together is amazing. It's the best damn lifestyle you can possibly have. We just need to convince more folks that the juice is worth the squeeze, and hopefully we can get that done as well. So. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today, Carrie. I hope that I answered your questions to the best of my ability. and
I appreciate you
always
taking-
available.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you very much taking the time. Yeah, a lot. So yeah, we'll probably be in touch again. And
Yeah, you bet.
all right, we'll sign off for
You
today.
bet. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.